Hey, welcome to Faith in the Fast Life with Nick Ordorf and Fast Life Ministries.
Oh, good morning, Fast Life listeners. We are here this morning with Jim Tanner. Jim is really a counselor at this point, right?
Yes, sir.
Sounds like we got a little bit of a past, some really cool things happening for you, some great things that you've done. I know doing the research, you've been a pastor, you've been a firefighter, EMT, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
EMT and also a dispatcher, which I once was a firefighter for the city of Pueblo, so we have that in common as well. I'm working on becoming a pastor, so that's common. We got a few things. We're on a level here. Man, listeners, we're just here to capture a story. We're going to be a little bit different today than some of these other podcasts. We're really going to touch in on a touchy subject, I guess we'd say, something that many people may not want to hear, but we're just praying today that God will take this story and just reach a few people out there. So maybe whoever's listening, maybe it's you, maybe it's somebody you know. I know there's going to be some cues and some things in here that are going to help us, and we're going to dive into sex addiction and pornography today. So, Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks
so great to have you here. Tell us about it. What's your story, Jim?
Well, I grew up in upstate New York. Everybody thinks New York is just a big city, but there's actually a pretty portion of it too, with trees and what we call mountains, but people in Colorado will just call rolling hills.
Yeah, rolling hills of upstate
New York. And when I was 5 years old, my mom left me, my brother, who was 4 years older than me, and my dad. And it was us, and we grew up together. And when a child loses his mom that young, that's a major issue. And I started seeking validation in my life. My dad, great father, but he had to end up working like 60, 65 hours a week just to help us survive. And, that coin term latchkey kid happened in the 80s. That was me and my brother. 5 years old, 9 years old, getting off the school bus with the key wrapped around our neck. We'd come home and no supervision. And I was looking for validation, looking for comfort. And I found a Penthouse magazine in my dad's bedroom. And the women in there never told me no. And so at 5 years old, I started this addiction that a lot of people don't think sex and porn is an addiction, but it meets all the models. It is a chemical addiction. It's just natural chemicals. And they've actually done MRIs on addicts that shoot up with heroin and porn addicts. And when they see porn and masturbate, the amount of chemicals that get released in the head is much more, because our body is wonderfully made.
Right.
And in the right context of sex, it's meant to be this powerful release. But when you start using it for wrong, it starts hijacking the brain. So at 5 years old, I find this Penthouse, and that sends me down a road of not trusting people, finding my validation in magazines and HBO specials late at night when my dad was asleep. And then just in my teen years, multiple women. I went to Bible college, and I just felt like a heretic the whole time. But I got married. I pastored a church as a youth pastor for a little while. And this whole time, just having this secret life that nobody would know about.
So this is similar to that, for the listeners that have heard my story, one of the very first podcasts, that's that living in that darkness and kind of that dual role, right? Like you're walking a fine line, and one side's in the dark, one side's in the light, and it's pulling on you. And it also touches a lot on what we talk about in general. I wasn't always a believer. It took me a while. God was calling me, but I went through a lot of darkness. You were kind of living dual roles. You're in the light and the dark. And I think so many non-believers out there have this vision that people are, pastors especially, are perfect, right?
Yeah.
Like they're this perfect person, like they're following God perfect. And the world almost puts them on a pedestal and says, well, there's no way I could be like them. Who do they think they are? But this is a real struggle. This is real. This is I don't know if you know statistics on this, but I'm sure.
So depending on the statistics you look at, all right. If you go to church this Sunday, I'm going to ruin church for everybody.
So we love our church.
I love our church.
Our people.
I love church people.
We are about relationship, not religion. Do you know Christ? Or do you know Christ on your couch? Do you know Christ on your deck? Do you know Christ in your car? Are you having a relationship with him? So that's Fastlife Ministries is all about pushing the relationship, not the religion.
Right. And when I was in my addiction, I'd be preaching that and looking at pornography in my church office. So there's this disconnect. There's this, I called it the dark closet in my heart that nobody could get to. As we look at the statistics, 50 to 75% of men in the church have looked at pornography this last week.
Wow. What about in the world alone? Because I've been struggling with this one in my head a little bit. Like, what is that percentage of men that have looked at pornography this week?
When we look at that, it's pretty similar. I have seen up to 90%.
That's kind of what I was
Now, the thing is, you've got to figure out, some people will define pornography differently, right?
Right.
Well, just looking at a penthouse isn't pornography. Just looking at swimsuit issues, not pornography. So, you look at these studies, and sometimes you can't even tell what they were defining it as. I personally define my sobriety as no sexual gratification outside my marriage. So if I look at a woman in a swimsuit, in a bikini, and I take a second look and I gawk and I let that infiltrate my mind, and now I'm thinking about her. Well, that makes me get that little tingle in my head, right? And so for me, that I don't even let myself do that. I don't let myself take second looks.
So similar to the addict, me being the addict or the alcoholic, you can't take that one drink, right? You can't have just one hit of anything. You can't just do one. There is no one. One is too many and never enough all at the same time. So similar in that sense, if you're looking at a woman that way, if your mind starts to fantasize that way. So I imagine you've developed tools over the time and steps and stuff like that to help take care of that.
Yeah. So one thing I have when guys come in my office, I haven't put a little rubber band on their wrist. Well, I haven't put a big rubber band on their wrist. And every time they are tempted, every time they want to take that second look or look at pornography, I have them snap their rubber band. Because what happens is we create connections in our brain, synapses. And we've got to break that. It's like your body's like, ooh, good looking woman. And you want to go somewhere in your head, and we've got to break that. And then the other thing I have them do is when they snap that rubber band, I'm like, you've got to look at every person as a wonderfully created person of God. Because we're all God's children. He created all of us.
Yeah.
And when you can start looking at women as children of the Most High God. So I've got 6 daughters. I got 6 daughters. And there's been times I've been out to dinner and I've noticed somebody staring at my daughter. Guess what I do when that happens? I stare that boy down. Now, I'm 6'5". I'm a pretty big guy, so I can scare people real easily. No. I mean,
gentle giant.
I'm also a wimp. So, they really came back at me. I'm in trouble. But if I started realizing if I'm that protective of my daughters, how much more is God protective of the women he created?
Yep.
And when that can happen in a guy's head, all of a sudden he's not going to have that big of a problem anymore because he can see a woman and go, that is a daughter of the Most High God, and I bless her, and Jesus help her find some better clothes.
Amen. Right. So little spin off on this. Couple things that come into my mind. I don't know if you know Frank Titoni, great man that goes to church with us. He wrote a book not too long ago. And I don't remember the exact verbiage. I'll have to have Frank on here someday to talk about it. But basically talked about when you see a pretty woman, basically pray to God and say, Lord, you do great work. You're amazing. And then move on from it, right? You don't let your brain go to that place because you immediately give God credit for his great works. And kind of the story of the looking at the woman thing, as we just go to conviction and things that happen. And, I was about a year sober. And crazy thing, my wife and I had a friend from Denver, back from my dark past, still a good man. He was actually DJing at a strip club in Denver, and my wife and I went up for Valentine's Day, and we said, well, let's go visit him. And we walked in there. This kind of goes back to like your daughter's thing, right? And we went in there, weren't thinking anything of it, going to say hi to Ty. And I was so convicted. This is before I actually found the Lord, before I was saved. But I'm watching these young ladies on stage, and I'm going, I can't be here. I told my wife, I said, I can't be here. Like, I'm not supposed to be here. Like, something's wrong about this. And I'm like, those girls have dads somewhere.
Yes.
And whether or not they know them, and this is before I'm a believer, so I didn't think about it as they're God's children. But it was a definite struggle. So you just want to kind of share that, to pull that out of looking at it. And one other thing that's so predominant to me, that, we talk about sex and these things, and you're 5 years old and you're looking at a magazine, not even really sure what you're looking at. I can't imagine me at 5 knowing, but I know somewhere between 5 and 10, we stumbled across a Playboy and me and the babysitter's kid, and we didn't know what to do with it, but we knew we weren't supposed to be looking at it, and therefore it was cool. Our world has become so strange like that right now. One of the things I tell my girls, I have 2 daughters, and this was also read in a great book. I can't remember the name of it right now, but virginity is the only gift that God gave you that he also gave you control of. God gives us many gifts. That's the one that we have control. We have the ability to say when we let that go or don't. And if you can look at your virginity in that sense, and even for men, to look at it in that sense as a gift, and it's a sacred bond between you and your wife and God. And therefore, that pleasure center that you talked about when you actually make love to your wife, it's that much greater. That's the way God intended it. And it's even greater than any satisfaction you could get from a magazine or a video or all the terrible things that are on your phone these days. So sorry for the interruption.
That's so true, because as I talk to guys in my office and myself, we can all remember that first magazine we looked at, that first woman we looked at. And this is why. When those chemicals are released, it's like glue in our head to what we're looking at. Now, if we look at it through the lens of the Bible, God wants us to be married to one woman. And if the first time you have sex, when you give up your virginity to your wife, guess what picture gets glued in your mind? Her. Now, when you see your wife, you get turned on. You're ready to have sex. What I see so often is men that are addicted to pornography, having affairs. The people that they're looking at, first off, they're airbrushed and they're fake, right? They don't look like their wife. And now, after years of getting turned on by what they're looking at, their wife doesn't look that way. And of course, as we age, things change, right? And now they're looking at 20-something women that are airbrushed, and then they look at their wife, and all of a sudden, why can't I have sex with my wife? Why do I have dysfunction?
Right.
Well, it's because your brain is wanting to look at X, not your wife. But if we follow God's design, the person that you have sex with should be your wife. And now when you look at her, your brain goes, all right.
Yeah, that's a huge one for our young listeners out there, is to keep that in mind. There's so many things that this world can grab a hold of you and pull you in so many directions. I know, obviously, Jim knows God has a big plan for us. If we follow his plan, it could just be so much more rewarding for all of us. Tell us a little bit more, Jim. I know you talked about being a firefighter. Actually, you haven't talked about being a firefighter. Forgive me on that.
You talked about that.
I talked about you being a firefighter. tell us more about that. Let's get a little bit more of the history of you. You've talked about 5 years old. You came through. You kind of found the addiction, but where'd the rest of your life go? And how did you end up here being a counselor with this? Like, when did you know? What were the signs? Tell us more.
So I went to college to be a pastor in near Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I got married, and I moved to Oregon. There was a church in Oregon that was about to close down. Rural Oregon, Hermiston, Oregon. I love that place. I was there for 13 years. And I went to open up this church, reopen it. And that time I became a volunteer. Then we all became part-time firefighters, a medic there. And it was great. I was there for 4 years. And my wife left me because of my addiction. Now, that's not what was written down in the divorce decree. But me looking back, I was pushing to get her out of my marriage. I wasn't going to sign the divorce decree, but I did everything I could to separate from her. And she left me. And, I say she left me like it was her fault. No, I pushed her out the door.
Right.
And so at that time, I obviously wasn't a pastor anymore and doing the part-time firefighter gig. And then I got a job at this chemical depot in emergency management, doing hazmat, high angle, low angle, rope rescue. And during that time, we destroyed all the chemical munitions, and they came to me and said, well, Jim, we got to let you go, or we can move you to Pueblo, Colorado. And I was like, where is Pueblo, Colorado? And so, I do like eating, so I said, okay, well, I'll move to Pueblo. And I moved here, and for 3 months, I lived in a hotel because my family was still back in Oregon, selling the house, finishing up school. And that's when my addiction came out. And I got caught having an affair. Working out at the Pueblo Chemical Depot, we found this great ministry up in Colorado Springs, Dr. Doug Weiss, Heart to Heart Counseling Center. And Dr. Weiss is one of the leading voices when it comes to sex addiction. He's been doing it for about 30 years. So we signed up for an intensive up there. I went for the intensive, went kind of kicking and screaming, not believing I was a sex addict.
So let me back you up just a minute.
Okay.
To cap something here. So you say you moved to Pueblo and your family came with you. But you're
3 months later.
But this is you're divorced at this time, or are you remarried now?
I was remarried at this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Just because you went from, we talked about being divorced because your sex addiction pushed it away. But now you found a new wife. You have kids with her now?
So I had 4 children from my first marriage.
Okay.
A daughter. So I had all daughters, 4 daughters. Got remarried. She had a daughter. And then we had a daughter together.
Okay.
I don't know what it's like to have a boy.
I've been blessed. God gave me a boy at the very end. So we have 2 daughters and a little boy that 3 years old. He's into everything. It's an absolute riot. So, okay, so I'm back on track with you. So now we're coming to Pueblo.
Yeah,
getting in with Dr. Weiss.
Go into Dr. Weiss, kicking and screaming, not thinking I'm a sex addict, not wanting to have that label. And I remember being in his office on the last day just going, oh, my word, this is who I am. I'm in these groups with other sex addicts, 12-step groups. And one of my good friends, Matt Peculio, who works up there, he and I were in the 12-step programs together. And I remember I walked in on a Thursday morning to his group. He was leading it, and there's a bunch of guys in there. And I just looked at them all, and they all look at me. And I said, I don't trust one of you. And I used some words I won't repeat. And they all just laughed at me. And they said, yep, we've been right there. Come on in, sit down. And listening to the group, I'm like, oh, my word, I'm just like these guys. But yet they had joy. They had some healing under there. So this started this journey of driving from Pueblo to Colorado Springs once a week for 12-step groups. And then I started our own group here in Pueblo West. And then I started back in college to get my master's degree to be a therapist. So I went to Adams State University graduated in 2019, and I left my corporate gig at the end of 2017 to become an intern with Dr. Weiss, and was there for about 2 years, and just felt God saying, hey, it's time to start bringing this message to Pueblo. So in 2019, I found an office downtown, and here I am.
Got it started. And I know you speak of Dr. Weiss in your YouTube videos as well. And there's a book that he has out, right? Is that something you suggest to people?
Yeah, so anybody who thinks they might be struggling with sex addiction, there's 2 books I would say. One's called The Final Freedom by Dr. Doug Weiss, and the other one's called Clean. Both of them are very good. The group that I started in Pueblo West, it's a 12-step group for sex addiction. I started by using the book Clean. Okay. Clean is great because it just talks about, it doesn't use the word addictions. And some people are scared about addictions. So it just talks about being pure. And then as you get through the book, it starts talking about addictions. So I was able to spin it out. Final Freedom's a little more like, hey, you realize you're here. Now how do we do it?
That's step 1, right?
Yeah.
Admitting you have a problem.
Admitting we have a problem.
I've been through some 12-step dances, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. And it's great programs. Is that something that, across the nation, is that pretty common to have sex addiction?
So there's a few
programs?
different programs. There's SLAA, Sex Love Addicts Anonymous. There's SA, Sex Addiction Anonymous. I run some Zoom groups because there are a lot of places where it's not available. My groups are called Freedom Groups, and it's a Zoom. And at first I was like, I don't know how well this is going to work, not being in a room.
Right.
But I got some groups that guys like are planning to go on vacation and all meet up in camp together.
Oh, that's cool.
So
finding some common ground,
yeah,
and some community, which is huge in the recovery process of anything, whether it's drugs or alcohol or sex. That's finding like-minded people.
Well, and that's what I love so much about the 12 steps is the very first word is we.
Correct.
We. And I had no we. I kept everybody at arm's length. Yeah. I looked good. I was like the face of the fire department in Oregon, in Hermiston. I was the guy who would take the truck for Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. I'd go to schools, and I was that face, and I looked like I had it all together, but nobody could come within arm's reach of me because I'm not going to let you know the inner parts of me, because that dark closet we talked about that was in my heart. If you truly knew me, you'd hate me. Yeah. It's this concept of all good, all bad. Right. I'm all good until something gets shown, and then I'm all bad. And I the biggest thing I try to teach people is, we're not all good, we're not all bad. We are good people because of what Jesus Christ did for us, and we have flaws.
Absolutely, yeah. We all fall short, right? And that's a big one. Like I know in your video you talk about it a little bit, and we've talked about it before with addiction and living in that closet. And I think Ben, actually, you brought it up at one point in time. You talked about pride. When you're in that section and you're living in that dark closet and people approach you, your pride is telling you, you can't let them in. Like, you can't let anybody know that you're this upstanding firefighter. I've literally been there. I was a firefighter for the city of Pueblo. I'm supposed to be something great. I'm a firefighter. Like, look at me. Like, this is what I always wanted from being a little kid. I can't let people know that when I get off shift, I drink for 48 hours straight and end up doing drugs and whatever else. They can't know that. Like, got to keep them at arm's distance. So yeah. I feel you there. And I think so many people out there are struggling with that same thing. And I say to our listeners again, like, this sets you free.
It does.
It really does.
Well, and look, not everybody's going to do what you and I are doing. We're not, I tell people there are tiers of people, right? Now, I won't share with you and the listeners everything I struggle with, but I got my guy. He's in Colorado Springs. We started recovery together, and we've always been in touch, and we talk weekly. it's starting to get more of at least a voicemail. But we try to talk a week or every other week. But this is the thing. I know that if I have a problem, I can call him, and he's not going to be judgmental.
Yeah.
And one thing I learned, James 5:16 says, confess your sins to others for healing. See, so often, especially in the Christian community, when we're struggling with sin, when we're struggling with an addiction, we cry out to God, heal me, heal me, heal me. I don't know how many times over 35 years I asked God to heal me. I'm like, God, why are you not healing me? I even had this false thought in my head that God said to me, you know what, Jim, healing's for everybody else. You've got to deal with this till you get to heaven, then you'll be healed. How horrible is that, right? It's not biblical. In John, it talks about you ask God for forgiveness, and he gives it liberally. But in the book of James 5:19, it says, confess your sins to others for healing. See, we've got to use our mouth, and we have to use confession for healing. And when I started doing that, things changed. In fact, there was one time one of my bottom line boundaries is no lying to my wife. Because in an addiction, we're great at lying, manipulating.
Oh, yeah, no lying, period.
So one night, I wasn't feeling good. I was feeling sick, and I took a shot of NyQuil, maybe 2. And I went and laid down on the bed, and I'm in that NyQuil zone, right? I'm like almost ready to fall asleep. And my wife came in and said, did you brush your teeth? Yeah. And I fell asleep. And the next day I woke up, and I remember saying that, and I said, yeah, but I couldn't remember if it was a dream or not. So I said, did you ask me if I brushed my teeth last night? She goes, yeah. I said, I didn't. I took that NyQuil and I passed out. That's a lie.
Yep.
So I went to group that night, and I told my group. And guys in my group are like, man, that's too much. You don't, And I said to him, you know what? I'm so good at lying that if I don't confess these little things, I'm on a slippery slope, and I'll confess. I won't confess the big things.
Yeah, I've said that many times in my sober walk. And the minute you start doing those old things, and the big one for me is the minute you start not telling people that I'm an addict alcoholic is the minute that I'm starting to lie about who I really am. Because that's who I am. That's who God made me, and he's got big purposes for us. But when you start telling even the littlest of lies, you're starting to slide down that slope again, and you're headed for dangerous waters. So tell us a little bit, so for the people out there that might be a sex addict that maybe are struggling with pornography, I know there's some cues or some signs.
Yeah.
What are those things that we can tell our listeners to?
Yeah, so you've got to look at what's going on. Are you waiting for opportunities and longing for them? Like, one thing I would do is I would, if we were going to go to a party or a family event, I would all of a sudden become sick. So my family would go and I could stay home and look at pornography and act out. So, lying about your time, finding time where other people are gone, becoming moody when you don't get to look at that pornography or act out. If you start yelling at the kids, kicking the dog because you haven't been able to do this, that's a sign. Losing track of time. Family goes to bed, it's 10 o'clock at night, you pop open your computer to look at pornography, the next thing you know, it's 5 in the morning. And you got to be to work at 6. Losing track of that time. Covering up, having to lie, having consequences. I know guys that have lost jobs because they looked at pornography on their work-given devices. Wives catching you in the act and not being happy. So those are a few. Money, having hidden money so you can go act out. I've got to have a credit card that she doesn't know about. I got to have a bank account. So those are a few things, and it's really, from a mental health standpoint, there's a diagnosis for, in mental health, we can diagnose alcoholism, drug addiction, gambling. And I hate that. I wish they'd do away with that and just say addiction disorder. because we can be addicted to anything. So I can take those all 9 criteria for addiction and change it to eating toilet paper. If you eat toilet paper, you could be addicted to eating toilet paper. But those are what we look at. And when I get somebody in my office, those are what I go down. Hey, what are these? And then I've got a full intake I take them through, which we don't have time for that today. But just over time, seeing what in their life, and of course, using Dr. Weiss's material, we've got a very good diagnostic criteria that we can go down. And depending where they're at, coming up with a game plan of going forward. And
right. So obviously this is some pretty, heavy stuff. I know one of the other ones that I used to do is that I still find it a habit sometimes today. It's almost like if my wife grabs my phone for any reason, I'm almost like unsure for a second, but I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not that person anymore. I'm not an addict. But in the days when I was using cocaine and the pornography went hand in hand with it, if somebody grabbed my phone, I was nervous about what they could find in there, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that's a sign for so many people as well, right? You're clearing your search history, you're doing all those things to try to hide this thing. That right there is a sign that you are in the darkness. If you're having to hide from others, you're hiding in the darkness, and Satan has you exactly where he wants you to be. What would you say to people that maybe they're not this deep? Maybe they're not, becoming sick for that family event or staying up till 5 a.m, but on a daily basis, teenagers, college kids, adults using pornography to get that fix instead of that. What do we tell those people that aren't at this level yet, but are right there on the edge and they're quote unquote flirting with disaster?
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. It's a slippery slope. And the sooner you can stop it, the better. I love in my group when I get a 20-something because I tell them all the time, I wish I would have been strong enough to stand up and say, I got a problem.
Yep.
If you're struggling with that, the first thing you got to do is you got to confess it to somebody. Yep. And then you got to find somebody who is trained. I don't know how many men have come to my office and they've gone to counselors who have no idea about sex addiction. It's kind of like a specialty. You wouldn't go to a podiatrist who is a medical doctor and say, I'm having problems with my heart. I need you to treat my heart. The podiatrist would be like, I don't know how to treat your heart. I can help you with your ingrown toenail. So you need to find somebody who is trained in this, who can help you. And I tell all my clients, my goal as a therapist is not to keep a client forever. I mean, I got to keep food on the table for my family. God has always brought me clients. What I want to do is get you to where you don't need me anymore. And I have many clients who I've seen for a few months and then they go away and then they come back every 6 to 8 months just for a tune-up. They say, I'm starting to circle the drain. I'm like, well, call me when you're circling, not when you're in the drain.
Right.
So if you're in that point where you're like, man, I'm looking at pornography, I'm feeling horrible about it, I don't like what I'm doing, confess to somebody. Go to a pastor, go to a family friend, somebody you can trust. You don't want this blurted all over town. And then find somebody who's trained in sex addiction that can, do an intake on you and see what you need. Because I'll tell you what, we have something in the groups I leave, we call them the 5 commandments. Pray in the morning for your addiction. God, help me today to stay sober, not look at women, and keep my eyes on my wife. However that looks for you. Next, go to group. Go to a group at least once a week. Next is make phone calls to men in that group daily. Just check in. Hey, I'm struggling today or I'm doing good today. That helps us rewire our brain from hiding to being in the light and telling. Next is reading. When I got into recovery, I was 40 years old, and I never read a book. And I was proud about that. If a book is worth reading, they'll make a movie out of it. I read up to 7 books a month now. And it's all about flushing our brain, putting good information in. And then lastly, before you go to sleep, pray again. Father, thank you for sobriety and help me stay sober tomorrow. Those things, those 5 commandments, I think are just bedrocks. You know, when we can be in a group of like-minded people, when we are not afraid to reach out and talk to them, when we're reading material to help us, you know, so many people spend hours a day, a week, looking at bad things. Well, now we got to flip that and start putting some good stuff in there. I don't know if I answered your question, if I went off on a tangent.
No, it's absolutely perfect. It's you know, those 5 things, and for those people, you know, that maybe, you know, we talk about having somebody to talk to. I know that there was times that my pride, when I was in my addiction, I felt like there was nobody I could talk to, and that's another lie that we start to tell ourselves, that, you know, nobody's going to understand this. I can't tell anybody because I'm living a lie. At the time, I found a forum, however, on Facebook that had a little bit of help, but it started me down that, hey, I'm not alone, I can go get help again. Is there things like that exist as well? There are forums on Facebook, on different things like that people can get a hold of, or is it?
You know, I know Dr. Weiss has some Facebook stuff out there, groups out there. And I know SLAA also has those. So if you search those, you can find those.
Okay. What about for people getting a hold of you?
So the way to get a hold of me, a couple different ways. Of course, go to my website, thenextrightchoicecounseling.com. From there, you can find, you can email me, or you can email me directly, jim@tnrccounseling.org. Or you can call me, 719-766-9299.
Lots of options here for to get help from Jim. You know, no matter what level you're in, where you're at, if you even know you are, maybe you know somebody is, maybe a spouse is listening right now and they're looking at these signs and saying, man, like maybe I need to get my husband help or my wife help. And there's another thing that we don't even talk about. I think that everybody just assumes that pornography addiction and sex addiction is a male thing. I am sure that there's a whole nother episode that we could do just on the women's side of it. We'll leave it alone for today. Jim, we are so thankful for you to be here with us and with our listeners. And as always, guys, fastlifeministries.com to give and keep this podcast and the whole ministry mission going. We just appreciate the time on the air with everybody. And we will sign out for today. Jim, thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
Have a great one, guys.